Hello, and welcome to the Pigeon's Passage, the blog of the Lakeshore Grounds Interpretive Center. My name is Ben Mitchell, and I'm an Assistant Curator here at the grounds. And today, I'm going to talk to you about bee hotels. Now, I was quite excited about this project. I'm very enthusiastic about bees, honeybees, native bee species, symbiotic creatures in general. But a few things that I'd like to talk to you about today are resources. As some of you know, we had a workshop this weekend that was very well attended. Thank you for everyone who came out, where we learned a few things about native bees and the relationship to honeybees and human culture, as well as how why one might want to make a bee hotel. So a few things in this blog post that I'll be sharing. If you look down below you there, to some of the links. There'll be a link to a handout of how to be bee-friendly, as well as to some of the resources that I used when I was designing this workshop. Now, a few things. Why would you want to build a bee hotel? Well, it's important to keep in mind that honeybees are a very specific species, right? Most of the bees in North America, the vast majority of the bee species in North America are not honeybees. There's about 4,000 different kinds of bees in North America. About 800 of those live in Canada. And of those kinds, most of them don't live in colonies. In fact, the way that we are used to thinking about bees is very strange in terms of the actual biodiversity or the great diversity of bees that are out there. About 3/4 of these bees actually live in the ground, and another quarter of them actually live in holes, usually in dead trees, dead wood, and whatnot, which is a point of concern when you're dealing with an urban environment like here in Toronto, where we tend to not let things lay where they are, really. I mean, because we like having lawns and very manicured spaces, there's not a lot of material, really nesting sites for a lot of native bee species, which is problematic because native bee species like honeybees are suffering a great deal right now. And in part also because, while we do tend to seem to notice honeybee loss, we don't have the same kind of knowledge or familiarity with native bee species who, because of the things that are happening to honeybees, are also suffering. And it's important to keep in mind that not everything that native bees do, honeybees can do particularly well. In fact, a lot of things are pollinated much more effectively by native bees than they are by honeybees. In particular, plants and vegetables and whatnot that are indigenous to North America. It may come as some surprise that honeybees are an introduced species, and in terms of ecological history, native bees have had a much longer time to adapt to and adjust to, life around things like pumpkins, like blueberries, like cranberries, like a lot of these plants that we take for granted, and are agriculturally very important, are in fact best pollinated by native bees. So that's some reasons why you might want to support native bees as well as honeybees. I think there's enough bee love to go around here. They're both very important kinds of creatures. But in terms of then what to do about it, I mean, the thing about bee hotels is that they provide extra habitat that we have essentially let go of. I mean, if you have a dead tree on your property, you can just not cut it down, or at least cut it down in chunks to give creatures habitats. Or if you actually want a crafty thing to do to help out, you can make a bee hotel. So a few things to keep in mind with bee hotels when you're designing them. Generally, this particular box is 7 inches deep. And the reason why I decided to do that was because most bees generally are happy to live in a space that's about 6 inches deep or shorter. So I made the box 7 inches so that there'd be a bit of a lip here, you see, inside, so that it would protect against wind and rain a little bit, when our bee friends are staying in there to lay their eggs or to take shelter. So that's one design principle that I built into this hotel. A few other things to keep in mind when you're building your own bee hotel is, I just nailed this in. It's not super fancy in that regard, but I wanted to make it an easy design to work with. If you want other designs, Google is full of them. Just do a Google image search for bee hotels, and you'll find all sorts of things. But for this one, pretty straightforward. Some things to keep in mind is when nailing, this is an early prototype I worked with, you want to make sure that you have either finishing nails or starter holes that you've drilled in, because otherwise it's going to crack. It definitely cracked on me. I tried to be really careful and I managed with most of them, but all it takes is one crack to kind of really give you a problem there for the entire thing. Another thing that you might want to keep in mind is, with this particular design, some of these things are held in with tension. I decided to do that because I thought it made it a bit easier to mix and match combinations of bamboo and of the wood there. But when you're putting this in with tension, I just hammered some of these in, but you're also in danger of forcing the nails out. So when you're using tension to secure the bamboo or the blocks inside your bee hotel, make sure that you're not securing it too hard with a hammer or something. Otherwise, you could actually just get the nail section to split. And that's also something you don't want to do when you're making your hotel. So, just a few other things to keep in mind in terms of materials. Again, you're trying to emulate essentially dead wood, right? So one thing you don't want to do, and I can't stress this enough, is you don't want to make it out of plastic. Don't use plastic tubing, rubber tubing, or whatnot. These things are very bad for trapping humidity in there, and moisture is really bad for your bee friends. It's bad for the bees, it's bad for their babies, it's bad for, i.e. the larvae. Sorry, that was bad. Anyway, so yeah, don't shy away from using rubber or plastics when you're making your bee hotel. Do try to use wood or some sort of similar material that will not trap in humidity like that. And yeah, so those are the main ingredients that you want to keep in mind. As I mentioned before, we will be sharing other things on our social media as well as on this blog post. I hope you found this an interesting discussion. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you again at the Pigeon's Passage.